Spit bars, I stand behind mine. Yeah. Sentences I serve, maximize guidelines. My lawyer can't give me his advice when these beasts that I murder carry mandatory minimums of life. Yikes. In case you didn't get the point, we spit bars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of The Maximum Sentence, where there's conviction behind the bars. I'm your man, AJ Throwback. Great to be here with you on not just any Wednesday. This is a very bittersweet day. And as you can see from the t-shirt that I have on, today is March 9th. And today actually marks 25 years since the tragic murder of one of my favorite MCs of all time, none other than the late, great Christopher Wallace, aka the Notorious B.I.G, aka Biggie Smalls, aka Big Papa, whatever you wanted to call him. Just one of the greatest of all time, you know what I mean? So I definitely wanted to make sure that I at least paid homage to somebody who greatly influenced me as a rapper. Thinking about 25 years ago, being a rapper was not on my mind. Like, I never thought that I would even really be writing rhymes like that. I was more of the R&B guy. I like writing R&B songs, creating R&B beats, but he was just somebody who I constantly listened to and was constantly inspired by. And I mean, like, even my style when I first started rapping, I wanted to be like Big, like more than anybody else. Granted, Jay-Z is my favorite rapper of all time, but at the time, at 17 years old, when Biggie, you know, before he was murdered, like, he really was the person I wanted to be the most like in terms of a lyricist, because I mean, he was just so smooth with it. Like, I really could resonate with his style of rap. And so, you know, today it's really an honor to be able to, 25 years later, do something that I would have never thought that I would be doing, inspired by one of my top 5 favorite rappers of all time. So continue to rest in power, Christopher Wallace, Notorious B.I.G, Biggie Smalls. And it's just great to be here with y'all on this day, to be able to just discuss hip hop at the end of the day. We are back for episode number 8. And this is the 3rd episode of breaking down my latest single, Loner's Remorse, produced by Gladiator, co-produced by yours truly, which you can get on my website, BAMMLLC.net. Once again, that's BAMMLLC.net. Before we go any further, if this is your first time checking out any of my content, please make sure that you like, comment, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Hit that bell notification so that whenever I go live, whenever I premiere a new video, or whenever I post a new video, you'll be among the first to know. So now that we got that out of the way, let's get to some of this love from the people who always show love to the Maximum Sentence, to this platform that's really just geared around having deeper conversations around the lyrics, specifically my lyrics. Mike Mountain on YouTube says, yo, I can definitely relate and feel this experience, bro. And shout out to my brother, Mike Mountain. He and I not only had a great conversation after he posted this comment, but then he also went out and financially supported the record. So I definitely appreciate that support, my brother. Ansley Jukeboxx Joy, my sis, my friend, she says, such a great breakdown. You give us so much to think about. And that's the key with this series, is that it digs a lot deeper than the bars themselves. So definitely appreciate your support. Shout out to Genetikz, the combination of Joey Bless and Black Gallagher, father and son combination. Make sure your child, please be on the lookout for their music. On Instagram, they are Genetic Music. They said, brother, these breakdowns are both introspective and insightful. Love what you're doing, family. Definitely appreciate that feedback. My brother T. Witz, he said, of course you're a damn Libra male. Duh. Makes so much sense now. A pure intellectual and such a genuine soul, Libra gang. Hey, you already know what it is, my brother. Appreciate you for constantly supporting. And finally, from my cuz, Christine Haynes on Instagram, she is the _momager_podcast. She said, whole therapy session. I'm sitting here shaking my head and talking back to my phone screen. These therapy sessions free of charge, so definitely appreciate you for supporting. So let's go ahead and last 2 weeks, we broke down the first verse of Loner's Remorse. This week, we're going to break down the first half of the second verse of Loner's Remorse. So let's get to it.
Went from Oxon Hill to Oxon Run where kids was sitting ducks and ward. Streets were critical. So before I fell asleep at night, I was reinvented through pretending more intrepid and invincible. Didn't have to catch for canvases, and my imaginings were magnified through the massive stacks of printed paper. Give me a ruler, pencils, melon tape, and markers. Had a young Black MacGyver, all the makings of an innovator.
All right, so let's get to the first 4 bars in this first half of the second verse. And what's crazy is before I filmed this, I just really I really read these lyrics. I'm like, man, this is powerful. So when I say, went from Oxon Hill to Oxon Run where kids were sitting ducks, them Ward 8 streets were critical. So before I went to sleep at night, I was reinvented through pretending more intrepid and invincible. Woo! I'ma tell you, like, there are a lot of parts in this song where I really love what I'm saying, like, and how it resonates and how I capture certain moments of my life. But those 4 bars right there, when I tell you that captures the essence of where I really just kind of sort of came of age as a creative, that was it. Because the thing is, in Oxon Hill was like this innocence. You know, I was protected by the bubble of being in the suburbs of DC, in Oxon Hill when it wasn't bad. Like, I lived in Oxon Hill Village when it wasn't the trap. When we left, it ended up becoming more dangerous. But when we were there, that thing was like a utopia. Like, I absolutely love living there. So you move from there to Savannah Place, because we moved to Savannah Place before we ended up moving to Halley Terrace in Southeast, but we lived in Southeast. Savannah Place was still Ward 8. Right behind us was Parklands. And I ain't talking about Villages of Parklands, what it is now. I'm talking about 87, 88 Parklands. Like, Bama's was getting handled. Now, granted, Bama's was getting handled in Villages of Parklands when I lived there from 2006 to 2014. People was getting handled then, but it was even worse in the 80s. Like, I remember talking to people and hearing stories where people were saying, like, it was somebody I knew that was from uptown, and they said the only way that you could really get in Parklands at that time, you had to have a pass from somebody that lived there. Otherwise, you were probably going to be running for your life trying to get out of Parklands. So Parklands was right behind my aunt Gloria and my uncle Raymond's house in Southeast DC. It was no joke. So we couldn't really do a whole lot of venturing off and going to these different places. Because, I mean, also what ended up happening, I didn't bring this part up. There was this one time that my cousin Carolyn sent me and my brother to the corner store. We walked up this alley, up to Alabama Avenue, over there right by the Eddie Leonard's. Anybody who's familiar with that area. Well, where the Eddie Leonard's is now, I don't think the Eddie Leonard's was there back then. But anyway, there's a corner store right there in that little spot. And so we went up to the corner store. My cousin, she sent me to get a bag of Cool Ranch Doritos, and I forget what else that she says, get maybe like a soda or something. So these kids from over there, Stanton Dwellings. So those were the projects where these kids was coming from. They were coming from Stanton Dwellings. So they run up on me and my brother. And, you know, it's 3 of them. It's 2 of us. But I'm 8 years old. My brother's all of 4. He's way too young to help out in this situation. So they see me with this bag of Doritos and it's soda in my hand. And they like, yo, run that bag of Doritos. And I'm like, nah. So these Bamas, it was like something out of a movie. All of them jumped in sync. I'm not making this up. They jumped in sync like this was something out of Karate Kid or Double Dragon or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or whatever you could think of, because karate was crazy in the 80s. That was all the craze, all the popularity in the 80s. These Bamas must have been watching too many kung fu flicks. They all jumped in unison, kicked me in the stomach, took my bag of Doritos for my cousin and the soda that I had, and ran off in the projects in Stanton Dwellings. I went back home crying, mad, and all of this because these kids jumped me for a bag of Doritos. I go tell my cousin. My cousin basically is like, mount up, let's go find them. You know what I'm saying? And my cousin, look, You see my cousin, you know what I'm saying, she's nice looking, she's cool and all of this, but she is definitely straight out of Southeast because she was ready. She was ready to go find these kids and manhandle them herself. Cause it was like, look, ain't nobody gonna sit there and pick on my little cousin and think they gonna get away with it. For her, it wasn't even about the bag of Doritos, it was the principle. So that's the type of stuff that we had to deal with living in Ward 8 Southeast, and that's before we moved to Holly Terrace. So we moved to Holly Terrace. So we lived with my Aunt Gloria, my Uncle Raymond, and my cousin Carolyn from, I want to say, November of 87 to about August of 88. So we moved to Holly Terrace August of 88. We get there, and you talking the part like we right by South Capitol and Atlantic. And anybody that knows Southeast know how much of a hotbed, how much of a hot spot South Capitol and Atlantic can be. So we round there. That's not too far from Third World, not too far from Oxon Run Park. A couple of times we went around there. We seen little basketball courts, we seen the playgrounds and all that, and we wanted to go. But my mom didn't really feel all that comfortable with letting us go around there like that because, to be honest, it was a lot of activity going on. It was drugs, it was violence, it was, people getting hurt, people getting killed around there. We was barely making it as is being in the spot that we were at, being at Holly Terrace. So before getting to the point of moving to Holly Terrace, because I'm getting a little too ahead of myself, but I wanted to paint the picture of what I was dealing with as an 8-9-year-old child in Southeast DC. Moving from Oxon Hill, mind you. When I was living with my aunt, my uncle, and my cousin, that was the time that I started imagining things. I started creating stories in my head at night to put myself to sleep, because a lot of times it was hard for me to sleep because it was this new environment. We didn't sleep in a bed. We slept in the basement on couches. So like that's what we had to deal with. That's what we had, because it was like we were staying with my relatives, but it was a thing like there wasn't a lot of room for us. So it was getting used to that whole situation, getting used to not being under the same roof with my father. That was a lot to deal with, going back to the last episode. And so you combine all of these things together, and we're in this not so safe environment. Granted, Savannah Place is a safe street. We always lived on safe streets, but they always were surrounded by not so safe streets. So we living in this kind of sort of bubble of a street that's in kind of the trap. And so it's a thing where it's like, okay, subconsciously, I feel like I created a character or a caricature of myself. Somebody who was tougher, somebody who was bigger, somebody who was more muscular, somebody who was bulletproof, somebody who could fight, somebody who could Jones, somebody who could do all of the things that I really couldn't do in real life, because I was only 8 years old trying to figure it out, trying to figure out all of these new situations. So that was the way I coped at night. That's the way I got to sleep at night. But little did I know was that was building my imagination. It was the beginnings of me doing a comic book series, my own comic book series. There was only a few issues of it, and I didn't really issue it. But amongst my friends that know me and remember the hood, it was a little bit of an edgy comic book series, because it wasn't your normal joint. It wasn't Superman, that's for doggone sure. But anyway, that's why it makes sense that I'm in hip hop, because a lot of what hip hop is driven by is making something out of nothing. And that's a lot of what I had to end up doing. I was already doing it leading up to developing my imagination even more, because I was already drawing. I was making these buses. I was making these buildings and cities and all of this stuff, and drawing cars and people, all of this stuff. I was already doing the creativity, but then it came to the point where I started telling stories in my head. Like, I didn't really think about telling stories. At first it was just drawing, but then it started combining into stories. And so even though I don't really draw much anymore, I draw a little bit, but not a whole lot. But even though I don't really do it as much as I did when I was a preteen, and even to a certain degree a teenager, I was still drawing when I was a teenager. The foundation for being able to paint pictures with words started from that time of being in my uncle and my aunt and my cousin's house in Savannah Place in Southeast DC, 1987, 1988. So that's really where the beginning of being able to paint pictures and be more illustrative beyond the drawing. That's where all of that started. And that's why that was important to note that in the song. So then you fast forward a bit and get to the next 4 lines where I say, didn't have the cash for canvases, so my imaginings were magnified through the massive stacks of printer paper. Give me a ruler, pencils, melon tape, and markers. Had a young Black MacGyver, all the makings of an innovator. Like, those lines might be 4 of the most significant lines of my rap career. That's why I say this song is so personal for me, because it speaks to a lot of different things. It goes back to the whole thing about hip hop, how we create something out of nothing a lot of times. I could have been a painter, but painting supplies are expensive. Anybody who's ever been to Utrecht, you remember them prices of them painting supplies in that store. A lot of people that would look like me, and especially from my side of town, we wasn't affording that. So I had to make do with what I had. Printer paper, cheap. Crayola markers, cheap. Marks a lot markers. Cheaper than, say, paintbrushes and paints and all of that. They were more expensive than Crayola, but they were still cheap enough that if I wanted to, like, I literally took my allowance. I wouldn't take my allowance and do some of the things that a lot of kids would do. I think the art drove me to make sure that I earned a good allowance. The art drove me to do well on my report cards so I could not only get a good allowance, but I could get good money on my report cards, because all I would do is take that money and invest it in my art. Little did I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about this, is that I'm breaking this down. I'm thinking how I was already, or God was preparing me to set up my future right now when I was 8, 9, 10 years old. He was setting it up the whole time, because that's exactly what I do now. I don't sit here and spend a whole bunch of money on fashion. I don't sit here and spend a whole bunch of money on splurging or any of that stuff. The stuff I spend money on now, it has to either do with my family or it has to do with my music. And the preparation started with getting an allowance, getting money on my report card, and taking that money and flipping it into my art. That's what I did. I was buying printer paper, or I advanced from printer paper to cardboard paper or poster board. And so a couple of sheets of poster board, Jones was cheap. Markers, cheap. Crayon, I didn't really use crayons, but pencils, cheap. Pens, cheap. All this stuff like was affordable, because I mean, the thing is, when you don't have the means, you got to make do with what you have. And that's always been what I've been about, whether it's been with drawing, whether it's been with music, because there's been times I've made fire beats with stuff, with music equipment that really isn't studio ready music equipment, but it's about having the imagination. And all of that stuff started from this particular time. And so it was like, all right, give me whatever I can use. I'm going to make a masterpiece, or I'm going to make masterpieces out of this. So I think I may have outlined it before, maybe in one of the last episodes, but kind of sort of going back to it, the whole thing of me making buses. That's the thing. A lot of people who came up with me in elementary school and junior high school, they remember about me. Joe made them Metro buses out of cardboard paper, out of poster board. And them Jones had sliding windows. And them Jones had seats in them. And the Jones had the fed boxes in them. The Jones had the little emergency joint to open the window. Like, it had the doors open. They even had wheels that rolled. This is what I did with the wheels. So I would take wheels, because at first I didn't make rolling wheels. I just made I just drew the wheels on and just kind of pushed the bus along, but it didn't really roll. You just pushed it. But I got to the point where I got the bright idea, like, you know what? I started seeing how toy cars back in the day, or toy trucks back in the day, they had detachable wheels. So I would take, and here is another thing that I would do with my money. I would go to, say, like the dollar store or the cheap store that I possibly could. I think maybe Dart Drug might have been still open at the time. I'd go to People's Drug, whatever store that I could go to that had the junks for cheap. So I would go there and buy a toy car, buy a toy truck that had detachable wheels. A lot of times it'd be like $1, $2, maybe even $3, maybe even as much as $5. But the point is, I would get the trucks with the detachable wheels, take the wheels off of those trucks, make a joint on my bus where I could make a slot where I could put the wheels at. I would measure the bus wide enough so that the wheels didn't look out of place. They fit the size of the bus. And that was another thing. Making those buses, it really helped me to get mathematical with things, because I had to figure out, okay, how do I create these buses to scale? I didn't know what really to scale was as a kid, although I kind of had a little bit of experience with making things to scale, because I used to, everybody remember the little Snap-on model cars that they used to sell in the stores. I used to wish I could be a millionaire just so I could just get those model cars and just put them joints together. I did the Snap-on joints. I did the joints with the glue, even though I hated the joints with the glue, because I always felt like I just put too much glue on stuff and I'd rather had a Snap-on joint. So I started off with the Snap-on joints. But the point is, that was the first part of me figuring out how to make things to scale. So then I would somehow research and find out, okay, most metro buses are 40 feet long. How can I convert that mathematically so I can make my buses not look all crazy in shape and size and all this and all that? It was deep. It was deep. But though that foundation of being inventive and being creative, like that's why the whole thing, had a young Black MacGyver. Because anybody remember the MacGyver show? And they got a reboot now, but anybody who remember the original MacGyver show, his name became synonymous with doing something that's makeshift or doing something with whatever you had available. He became a verb in a lot of ways. That's what I was good at doing when it came to creating the things that I created. Because it all goes back to that time when I wanted the toy bus. I couldn't get that toy bus. And so it was like, okay, well, if I can't get it, I'll make it. That's simple, But before we set up the downside of that for next week, because that's really what this conversation is geared to do. I don't want us to get ahead of ourselves before next week. But the importance of setting this up the way that I'm setting this up is because it gives you a glimpse of what my mindset was between specifically 1987 and I say around about 1989 when I was in the 4th grade, because I talk a lot about the 4th grade in these past 2 episodes. But the roots of a lot of this stuff started in the 3rd grade in terms of my creativity really going to another level. And I'm not even saying I was like so great in the 3rd and 4th grade, because it got better by the time I got to the 7th grade. But the thing is, because I was dealing with so much in my life as a kid, dealing with the fact that my parents had split up. And 3 days before my 11th birthday, my parents divorced. Dealing with being around kids who I felt like just really didn't like me. Dealing with the fact that I had to be the more responsible one. It was a lot of pressure put on me to be more responsible because I was the older brother out of me and my brother. And that's another thing we'll get to next week, the relationship with my brother and how me being in this, so engulfed in this world, how it affected him. Having so much thrown at me, and then being in an environment, an unsafe environment, not being able to go to a playground, basically having to play on the street that we lived on. We lived on Halley Terrace. We did everything on Halley Terrace. We played football. We played basketball. Somebody would make a hoop, or somebody had a football. We played football on the street. We ain't go to no field. We played right on Halley Terrace. This is the type of stuff that we had to do, because if we went any further than our block, who knows what could have happened. Kids was getting killed for less, you know what I mean? Like for no reason, or just being at the wrong place at the wrong time. My mom did not want anything to happen to us because we were her only 2 children. So, and she was basically our protector because my dad wasn't consistently around at the time. Like, he came around, but he had his own issues that he had to deal with. And it's not to say that he wasn't a part of my life. He was a part of my life, but he wasn't the part of my life that I needed at that time. And so I'm dealing with all of these things. So art ends up becoming the ultimate escape for me at that time. But like I said, there's one side of that, and then next week we get into the dark side of that. A lot could be surmised from all of the things that I've said, but you could listen to the song and have your own experience and connect with your own experience of being in a certain place or going through certain things in your life as a kid that may have pushed you to a certain level of creativity, no matter what that creativity looked like. It doesn't have to be art. It doesn't have to be music. It could be dance. It could be flipping creativity into sports. A lot of times people don't understand, even though it's athleticism, it's art. To be able to do a lot of the things that these athletes are able to do, that's an art, man. You know what I'm saying? So, and whatever it has to be, it doesn't even have to be in the arts. It doesn't have to be in the entertainment. You could flip that creativity into anything. But sometimes it comes out of necessity. It comes out of desperation. It comes out of not having. It comes out of a deficit, and you turn it into a surplus. So if you have a story like that, please feel free to share. info@BAMMLLC.net. Shoot me an email. Let me know your story if you can relate to this, or you can just drop it in the comments here and I'll showcase your comment next week on the next episode of The Maximum Sentence. If you don't have my new single, Loner's Remorse, produced by Gladiator, co-produced by me, please make sure that you go to my website, BAMMLLC.net. Once again, that's BAMMLLC.net. From there, you can go buy the single, or you can go to your favorite streaming platform. And also, I have a connection to my Bandcamp page, which is ajthrowback.bandcamp.com. Once again, that's ajthrowback.bandcamp.com. Whether you buy it, whether you stream it, I appreciate the support, but I do ask, as I always ask, if you're going to stream it, please make sure that you listen to the song in full, all 4 minutes and 31 seconds of it, and add it to a playlist. Please make sure that if you love what you are seeing with The Maximum Sentence and all the content that's on my channel, please make sure that you like, comment, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please hit those bell notifications so whenever I go live, premiere a new video, or post a new video, you'll be among the first to know when I do. And if you are not already following me on social media, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter. I am at AJThrowback. But if you are an Instagram or TikTok person, I'm on those platforms as well. I am at a.j.throwback. So next week, we're going to break down the second half of the second verse of Loner's Remorse. So definitely make sure that y'all tap in for that, because it's going to be a continuation of this conversation right here. This was the setup for next week. Next week might be even more pivotal in terms of this story than even this week. But you had to have the origin story in order to understand how these next 8 bars are very significant in terms of the whole idea of being an introvert and the pros and the cons. You're getting more of the cons next week. So definitely looking forward to that. I appreciate everybody's support. Once again, my name is AJ Throwback. You have been watching The Maximum Sentence, where there's conviction behind the bars. And I will see you all next week. Make sure that you enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy Biggie Day. If you're a Biggie fan like me, blast some Biggie today. Show some love for that man, you know what I'm saying? Especially if you know how much he contributed to hip-hop culture. Make sure you show some love to that man. If it's warm enough, blast it out the windows. If not, maybe just crack the windows a little bit. But anyway, y'all enjoy, and I will see y'all next week. Peace.
to myself some most comfortable resort. Was homeless as a loner, now I'm living with remorse. Yeah, I was homeless as a loner, now I'm living with remorse.